Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something I think is on a lot of people's minds. Are the AI language models we're all starting to use maybe showing some political bias?
Yeah, it's a big question.
I mean, think about how often we turn to them now, right? For quick answers, understanding the news, even just brainstorming. If they're not completely neutral, well, that could really color the information we get.
Absolutely. It really could shape how we see the political landscape. So our mission today is to, dig into the findings of a brand new Stanford University study that's looking at this head on.
And we want to connect it back, right, to some earlier research, see if there are trends emerging.
Exactly. See the bigger picture in this really fast-moving field.
And one of you actually shared some great sources with us, which was fantastic. We've got this recent Stanford study, like hot off the press practically, and also a really insightful piece from MIT Technology Review that was from last year, I think, exploring similar ideas.
That's the one. So let's jump into Stanford first. What do they actually do in this new research?
Okay, so the Stanford team, their approach was pretty smart, actually. Instead of just, looking at the AI output themselves.
Just ask people.
Exactly. They asked real people for their opinions. They got, get this, over 180,000 evaluations.
Wow.
From more than 10,000 folks across the U.S. Democrats, Republicans, regular AI users, the whole mix.
Okay, so a big sample. And what were these people evaluating?
They looked at responses from 24 major AI models.
74, okay.
Yeah, to 30 different current political issues. So real stuff people are debating now.
Right, not just abstract things. Can you give an example or two? What kind of topics?
Sure, like they use questions about tariffs on foreign goods. Should we have more? That kind of thing.
Okay, yeah, definitely politically charged.
And also the federal minimum wage, should it go up significantly or stay put? Topics with clear divides.
Got it. So what did all these thousands of people actually think? What was the general feeling about the AI's political slant?
Well, this is the really striking part from Stanford. The headline finding is that nearly all the leading models, they looked at OpenAI, Google, Meta, Anthropic, even xAI, DeepSeek.
So basically everyone.
Pretty much, yeah. They were perceived as leaning significantly to the left.
Significantly left.
That's what the users felt. And it wasn't just Republicans saying this. Lots of Democrats apparently saw it that way, too.
Huh. That's quite something. A broad agreement on that leftward perception.
Yeah.
Were there any models that, stood out, maybe one seen as most left-leaning?
Yes, definitely. They found OpenAI's O3 model. That's their newest one, right? From April this year.
I think so, yeah.
That one was seen as left-leaning on 27 out of the 30 topics.
27 out of 30. Wow, okay. That's prominent.
Very. But what about the other end of the spectrum? Did any model seem more neutral to users?
Yes. There was one that came out looking better on that front.
Yep.
Google's Gemini 2.5.
Of the multimodal one. That came out end of March.
That's the one. It was perceived as having the fewest biases overall. Users saw it as neutral on 21 of the 30 topics.
21 neutral, okay.
Only 6 were seen as left, and just 3 as right-leaning. So, yeah, a pretty noticeable difference compared to the O3 model.
Interesting. So we're seeing this range of perceived bias even among the top models. Now, the Stanford study also looked at something else. What happened if you specifically told the AI to be neutral?
Ah, yeah, that's a really interesting angle, and potentially quite important.
What did they find there?
Well, when they prompted the model specifically for a neutral stance, people did perceive the output as more neutral. It made a difference.
Okay, so the prompt matters for perception.
It seems so. And what's also telling is that Republican users actually showed a modest increase in interest in using the models when they got those neutral prompted responses.
Huh. So just asking for neutrality can shift how biased it seems and maybe even how willing people are to use it.
Kind of looks that way, yeah. It suggests perception isn't entirely fixed.
Okay, let's pause on that for a sec. It's like perception is malleable to a degree. Now, you mentioned that older study, the one in the MIT Technology Review piece. How do these new Stanford findings stack up against what they found back in, 2023?
Right, and this is where it gets really interesting, because the picture isn't quite the same.
How so?
That 2023 study, the one MIT reported on, it found OpenAI's models, ChatGPT and GPT-4, were the most left-wing libertarian.
Both libertarian, okay.
But, and this is the key difference, it also pegged Meta's Llama model as the most right-wing authoritarian.
Whoa, okay. That's very different from Stanford finding an overall left perception, including for Meta's models.
Exactly. A pretty significant contrast.
So what could be going on there? Why the different results between the studies?
Well, there are likely a few things at play. And it really highlights just how dynamic these AI models are,
Yeah,
They change.
they're constantly being updated.
Right. The MIT article pointed this out. Even different versions of the same model from the same company can shift their leanings over time. They gave an example, I think, about how GPT versions differed on taxing the rich.
Ah, okay. So the specific model version tested and when it was tested is really crucial.
Totally. It suggests that, taking one snapshot of a model's bias might not tell the whole story long term. We probably need ongoing checks to track these things.
Makes sense. They're not static. Now, both articles mention the companies, the developers, they know this perception of bias is out there, right?
Yes, definitely. Both sources confirm the companies are aware. MIT noted OpenAI saying they tell their human reviewers, the ones who help train the AI, not to favor any political group.
And Stanford.
Stanford points out that Meta, when they released Llama 4, actually put a note out acknowledging this historical left-lean perception in leading AI.
Oh, they acknowledged it.
Yeah, and stated they were aiming to reduce that bias. So the developers are definitely thinking about it, or at least saying they are.
Okay, so they're aware. But the big question, maybe the million-dollar question, why might these biases or perceived biases exist at all? Did the MIT article get into potential reasons?
It did explore some possibilities.
Hmm?
A big one is the training data, right? The colossal amount of text these things learn from.
The stuff they read to get smart.
Exactly. They theorized that maybe older models like BERT, trained on maybe more books perhaps,
Hmm?
could differ from newer GPT models trained more heavily on, well, the internet.
And the internet might have a different skew.
They suggested it might lean more liberal overall. And the basic idea is, if the data you feed the AI is skewed politically, the AI can just sort of absorb that skewness, maybe even amplify it without meaning to.
So it reflects the data, warts and all. What about the Stanford study? Did they pinpoint a cause for the left slant they observed?
They didn't determine the exact underlying reason, but they did suggest it's probably not just users seeing bias where there isn't any, not just people reacting to facts they disagree with on these value-heavy political topics.
So it's likely something more fundamental in the models or their training, not just subjective interpretation.
That seems to be their leaning, yeah.
It's complex.
And the MIT piece even quoted a researcher saying getting rid of bias completely might be, well, impossible.
Yeah, Chan Park from Carnegie Mellon, one of the researchers on that 2023 study, he basically said they believe no language model can ever be totally free from political biases.
That's a strong statement.
It is. And Justin Grimmer from the recent Stanford study sort of echoes a related point. He highlighted that the main takeaway from their work is simply that users across the board perceive these models as left-leaning by default. Whatever the deep reason is, that's the current perception.
So the perception is real and widespread, even if the why is still debated and fixing it is hard. Okay, let's shift a bit. Why does all this matter? What are the stakes here, the implications of these perceived leanings?
Well, the Stanford study put it quite starkly in their significance statement. They basically said, look, these LLMs are increasingly the gatekeepers for political information through search, news feeds, everything.
Right. So understanding their potential ideological leanings isn't just academic. It's becoming critical for, a healthy information environment.
Mm-hmm.
And they argue using user feedback, like they did, is a vital tool to spot and maybe start to fix any partisan slant.
Makes sense. And the MIT article, did it raise specific harms, potential negative outcomes?
It did. It floated some concerning ideas, like could a biased AI refuse to give advice on certain sensitive topics, maybe healthcare or something? Or could you get customer service bots generating offensive or skewed replies?
Ooh, yeah.
But the main concern from Stanford seems to be that more subtle filtering and framing of political info over time. That slow, steady shaping of understanding.
That gradual impact could be really significant. So these are definitely things we need to watch as we use these tools more. What about fixing it, though, the practical challenges? Is it just about cleaning up the data?
Both studies suggest it's way trickier than that.
Yeah, I bet.
The MIT article talked about the sheer size of these data sets, finding and removing every bit of potential bias from, trillions of words. It's incredibly hard. Plus, AI can be weirdly good at picking up subtle patterns you might miss.
Right. But the Stanford study did offer that little glimmer with the prompting.
Yeah, that was their more immediate finding, that just asking for neutrality can at least shift user perception. Doesn't necessarily fix the underlying model, maybe, but changes how it comes across.
Interesting distinction. Did the researchers admit any limitations to their own studies?
Oh yeah, good science usually does. The MIT piece mentioned they sometimes had to use older or smaller models for certain tests because of access issues back then.
Okay.
And they also flagged that AI can just make stuff up, sometimes hallucinations, right?
Mm-hmm.
So weird answer bias, or just an error. Hard to tell.
Right. And Stanford.
The Stanford team acknowledged that measuring perceived slant, which was their focus, is only one piece of the puzzle. There are other ways bias could manifest that they didn't measure.
Okay, so putting it all together, we've covered the new Stanford study, connected it back to the older MIT review piece. What are the main things you think we should take away from this deep dive?
Well, I think the biggest thing from the new Stanford work is this really strong signal about current user perception. Right now, users across the political spectrum tend to see these major AI models as leaning left.
Even many Democrats.
Right. And what's fascinating is how that perception compares to, say, the 2023 findings MIT discussed, which showed a more mixed bag, even finding a right-wing lean in one major model back then.
So things are changing, or at least perceptions are.
Exactly. It really hammers home how fast this space is moving, how these models evolve, and how complex it is to really get a handle on political bias, perceived or actual, within them.
Right. So for you, the listener, the takeaway here is that being aware of these potential leanings, or at least the perception of them, is getting more and more important.
Mm,
As AI becomes just a normal part of how we find stuff out, knowing this helps you be a more critical, more informed user of whatever the AI spits out.
precisely. And it leaves us all with some really big questions to chew on, doesn't it?
Like what?
Well, like, given that the findings seem to shift over time, and everyone admits it's super hard to remove bias completely,
Yeah.
how should we approach information from AI, both as individuals and, as a society?
Yeah, and what's the responsibility of the companies making these incredibly powerful tools? Do they need to guarantee neutrality? Or just be upfront about potential biases?
And maybe the most mind-bending one from the Stanford study.
Mm-hmm.
What does it really mean for our information future if just tweaking a prompt asking for neutrality can change how biased we think the information is?
Mm-hmm. That's a lot to think about. Definitely food for thought as AI continues to weave itself into our lives.